An aged German Shepherd, a veteran canine officer, lay listlessly upon the cold, sterile surface of the examination table at the veterinary clinic. His powerful body, once a picture of strength and agility, was now alarmingly frail, unable to summon the energy for even the slightest movement. The final preparations had been made. The veterinary staff knew there was nothing more they could do to alleviate his suffering. The syringe containing the lethal injection was prepared and held ready. It was undeniably time for this brave old warrior to finally find peace and say his last goodbyes. But then in that hushed, somber room, just as the needle was carefully brought closer to his skin, something unexpected and profoundly moving occurred. From deep within his chest, the old canine shepherd emitted a sound, a guttural, profoundly desperate howl that seemed to vibrate through the very air and send an undeniable chill down the spines of everyone present. It wasn't a simple yelp of pain or a call for general attention. This was a primal, heart-wrenching expression of yearning. He wasn't crying out for help in a physical sense. He was pleading with every last ounce of his failing spirit to see his beloved owner one final time. There was, however, an immense and seemingly insurmountable obstacle standing in the way of this final reunion. His owner, the man he had served alongside for years, the only human who truly understood him, was miles away, confined to hospice care, and himself dying from an aggressive terminal form of cancer. The logical, rational minds in the room immediately concluded that it would be utterly impossible for these two souls, both so close to the end of their journeys, to be reunited before it was too late. Yet the events that unfolded next were so extraordinary, so unexpected, that they left absolutely everyone involved utterly speechless and in a state of genuine shock. Before we delve deeper into the incredible twists of fate that followed, please consider subscribing to this channel if you haven't already. Give this video a like to show your support for powerful stories like this, and most importantly, turn on notifications by hitting that bell icon so you won't miss the astonishing continuation of this narrative. This is more than just a story about a dog. It is a profound testament to an unbreakable bond, and it promises to fundamentally change the way you perceive the true meaning of loyalty, courage, and love forever. The atmosphere in the small veterinary clinic room was oppressive, thick with a silence that felt heavy with unspoken grief and anticipation. The only sounds that dared to pierce this stillness were the soft, insistent, rhythmic beeping emitted by the various medical machines monitoring the old dog's vital signs, and the faint, distant murmur of ordinary conversations happening just outside the room's door in the waiting area. The harsh, overhead fluorescent lights cast a cold, sterile glow across the clinical space. Their unforgiving illumination did nothing to soften the raw heartbreak that hung palpable in the air. Stretched out upon the cold, stainless steel table, the old German Shepherd lay almost completely still. This was Max, the hero K9, whose once powerful and imposing physique was now sadly reduced to a state of utter frailty and weakness. His fur, which had once been thick, glossy, and vibrant, was now dull and noticeably graying, particularly around his muzzle, marking the passage of time and the toll of age. His deep brown eyes, which had once sparkled with intense purpose, intelligence, and unwavering focus during his years of active service, were now cloudy, distant, and unfocused, reflecting the deep weariness that had settled over him. Every breath he took was a visible struggle, a shallow, rattling inhale that seemed to originate deep within his failing chest. His body had simply given everything it had to give over a long and arduous lifetime dedicated to serving others. Standing quietly beside Max, Dr. Larson, the attending veterinarian, gently stroked the old German Shepherd's head. His touch was remarkably careful, almost reverent, a gesture born of respect for the animal's storied past and the life he was about to help end. Dr. Larson had performed this difficult procedure countless times before throughout his career, but he would readily admit that it never ever became easier, especially not in cases like this. Max wasn't just another elderly dog reaching the end of his natural life. He was a genuine hero, a distinguished veteran of the K9 unit. For 14 tireless years, he had dedicated his life to public service, a career path that constantly required him to willingly run headfirst into dangerous situations, when the natural instinct for most living beings is to flee. Max had been a highly specialized rescue canine, trained to utilize his incredibly acute sense of smell and his innate intelligence to sniff out and locate survivors trapped within the chaotic wreckage of collapsed buildings. He had been deployed to find individuals lost and disoriented in vast, unforgiving wilderness areas and to assist in pulling injured persons to safety from hazardous environments. He had unquestionably saved lives an immeasurable number that nobody could possibly count. But time, the one adversary that no living creature, no matter how strong or brave, can ultimately defeat, had finally caught up to him. Now the very body that had once moved with such precision, power, and unyielding strength was inexorably failing him. The vet sighed softly, his gaze drifting over the small team of veterinary assistants, who stood quietly in the room, their faces etched with sadness, watching the scene unfold. They were all aware of Max's story. They had seen the reports detailing his condition. His body was systematically shutting down. The pain he was experiencing was steadily increasing. His once powerful muscles were now far too weak to even support his weight, leaving him unable to stand. And critically, his heart was beginning to fail. Euthanasia, though heartbreaking, had been determined to be the most humane and compassionate choice available to prevent him from suffering further. But what made this particular situation uniquely unbearable wasn't solely the impending loss of a true legend in the canine community. It was the cruel, almost poetic twist of fate that had made it seem utterly impossible for Max to spend his absolute final moments with the single person who had ever truly mattered most to him in this world, Daniel. Daniel was more than just his handler. He was his best friend, his unwavering partner through thick and thin. Daniel had been the undisputed center of Max's world from the very first day they had met and bonded. A former firefighter himself, Daniel had worked side by side with Max for nearly a decade. Together, they had faced unimaginable dangers, risking their lives tirelessly in the aftermath of disasters. Daniel had learned to trust his canine partner with his own survival, relying implicitly on Max's instincts and training in life-or-death situations. They had been truly inseparable, a duo forged in the intense heat of fire, the constant presence of danger, and the long, exhausting nights spent digging through rubble, working relentlessly to locate and save the lives of complete strangers. But now, in a tragic parallel to Max's own decline, Daniel was also dying. He was suffering from a cancer so aggressive, so rapidly advancing, that it had rendered him completely bedridden, requiring full-time hospice care. He had fought the disease with every ounce of his strength for as long as he possibly could, but ultimately the relentless illness had won. His body, which had once been as strong and resilient as Max's, had sadly withered, mirroring the frailty of his loyal canine partner. The day they had placed the difficult call to Daniel, informing him that Max was rapidly slipping away and that the time was near, he had desperately pleaded with his doctors and the hospice staff. He had begged them with tears in his eyes and a voice raspy with weakness to be allowed to go to the veterinary clinic to be with Max. When that proved impossible due to his critical condition, he had then begged them to somehow arrange for Max to be brought to him to his bedside in the hospice facility. But his physical state was so incredibly fragile that even the slightest movement from his bed, let alone a trip across the city, could potentially mean the absolute end for him. So here they were, two formidable warriors, two resilient survivors, both inexorably fading, and both in these final crucial moments heartbreakingly alone. Daniel had voiced one final poignant request: just let me be with him when it happens. But under the circumstances, it seemed like a cruel, impossible wish. Dr. Larson took a deep, measured breath, the weight of sadness pressing heavily against his chest. He reached out his hand, his fingers closing around the plastic syringe, preparing to administer the lethal injection that would at last take away Max's relentless pain and suffering. The old German shepherd lay utterly still on the table, his breathing now distressingly shallow, his body clearly exhausted by the long fight. "Doctor." Larson leaned closer, his voice soft, barely above a whisper as he murmured, "It's okay, boy. You can rest now." You've earned it." Then in the instant that felt frozen in time, as the cool clinical tip of the needle gently brushed against Max's thinning skin, that impossible thing happened. Max moved, with a slow, almost agonizing effort, summoning what had to be the very last reserves of strength left within his frail body. He lifted his head from the table. His graying ears twitched, rotating forward, straining to hear something. His tired muscles tensed beneath his skin. And then from the deepest part of his being, from his very core, he let out that sound again. A sound so raw, so utterly saturated with pain, longing and desperation, that it sent an undeniable jolt, a wave of chills through everyone in the room. He howled. This was no ordinary sound. It was a primal cry, a heartfelt plea, a telepathic call, a desperate, soul-searing, heart-wrenching demand to see his owner. The sound was sharp and piercing, cutting through the heavy silence of the room like a freshly honed blade. One of the veterinary assistants gasped audibly, reflexively, covering her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with astonishment and empathy. The receptionist standing just outside the door paused mid-step, her own eyes fixed on the room, mirroring the disbelief. Max howled again, his voice noticeably weaker this time, but the urgency, the absolute clarity of his intent remained just as potent. It was as if he knew, as if even from miles away across the bustling city, he could somehow sense Daniel slipping away. It was as if he understood with a depth of connection that defied logic that his best friend, his human counterpart, was on the other side of town, just as close to the threshold of death as he himself was. Dr. Larson's hand holding the syringe began to tremble. He had been fully prepared just moments ago to depress the plunger, to gently guide Max into a peaceful, painless final sleep. But now faced with the raw, undeniable power of that sound, the clear intent behind it, he hesitated. He couldn't bring himself to complete the action. Then abruptly, the door to the examination room burst open. A nurse from the clinic's front desk stood there, her face visibly pale, her hand tightly clutching a phone that was visibly shaking. "You need to stop," she gasped out, her voice breathless and urgent. "Daniel, he's coming here." Dr. Larson frowned, his brow furrowed with confusion and disbelief. "That's simply not possible," he stated, his voice firm but questioning. "He's in hospice care in critical condition." "He is coming," the nurse repeated emphatically, pressing the phone more firmly to her ear as if seeking confirmation. "They said he's absolutely refusing to stay in that bed. They can't physically stop him. He's demanding to leave." The vet's eyes widened in stunned realization. It was an almost unbelievable sequence of events. Max, on the brink of death, had cried out for his handler, for his human. And somehow, against all medical probability, against the crushing weight of his own terminal illness, Daniel had heard that call. The entire room seemed to freeze in a collective state of shock and disbelief. Max, the old German shepherd who had barely stirred or shown any sign of life beyond shallow breathing, for days now, lay still, once more breathless, after expending his final burst of energy on that desperate, heart-wrenching howl. His frail body trembled slightly. His breathing was shallow and labored, but remarkably, a new light seemed to flicker in his tired eyes. A spark of undeniable hope. Dr. Larson instinctively pulled his hand back, his grip tightening almost unconsciously around the syringe. The lethal injection, which had been mere seconds away from ending Max's suffering, now felt incredibly heavy, charged with an impossible significance. He looked intently at the nurse who remained standing in the doorway, her phone still clutched tightly in her shaking hand. Are you certain?" Dr. Larson asked, his voice tight with a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. "Daniel is truly on his way here." The nurse nodded frantically, confirming the unbelievable news. "Yes, his doctor called. They tried everything they could to stop him. They said he's far too weak, that he shouldn't be moving, but he absolutely won't listen. He's demanding to be brought here to see Max. He just keeps repeating Max's name." "But how?" One of the veterinary assistants whispered, a young woman named Emily, whose eyes were already glistening with unshed tears. "How is that even possible? He can't even stand up on his own." Nobody in the room had an answer that made any logical sense. Daniel's aggressive cancer had systematically drained every last ounce of strength and vitality from his body. The last time Dr. Larson had spoken with Daniel's hospice nurse, she had relayed that his condition was so advanced he could barely manage to lift his head from the pillow. There was simply no medical explanation, no rational way he could possibly make the physically demanding trip from the hospice facility across the city to the clinic. And yet the impossible was happening. He was coming. Max's final desperate howl had somehow reached him, piercing through the fog of pain and weakness. The old dog shifted almost imperceptibly on the steel table, one of his front paws twitching slightly. Just moments before he had been drifting away, his consciousness fading into that quiet, painless place where gentle sleep transitions seamlessly into forever. But something powerful had pulled him back from the brink. The undeniable pull of his owner, his best friend, his partner. The single reason that still compelled him to fight even when his body was giving up. Dr. Larson let out a long, slow exhale, the sound filled with a complex mix of relief and trepidation. He carefully placed the syringe back onto the sterile metal tray. "Then we wait," he stated simply, his voice firm. A collective shaky exhale swept through the entire room as everyone mirrored his decision. But simply waiting might not be enough. Miles away at the hospice facility, Daniel's room had suddenly become a blur of controlled chaos and frantic activity. Nurses were pleading with him, their voices gentle but firm, trying desperately to persuade him, to physically coax him back into the safety of his bed. But Daniel, summoning a reserve of willpower that seemed utterly divorced from his physical state, fought them off with what little energy he had left. His body was emaciated, profoundly weak, barely functioning, ravaged by the disease. But none of that seemed to matter to him in that crucial moment. Max needed him, and nothing else in the world was as important. With a supreme act of pure, unadulterated determination, he somehow managed to push himself upright in the bed, then maneuver his skeletal frame into the waiting wheelchair. His frail, trembling hands gripped the armrest with every last atom of strength he possessed. His vision swam black spots dancing erratically in his periphery, a clear sign of his body protesting the exertion. But he forced himself to breathe through the searing pain and overwhelming dizziness. "I have to go!" he rasped out, his voice thin and strained, but infused with absolute conviction. His doctor, a weary man who had witnessed the heartbreaking struggle of far too many patients, fighting battles they simply could not win, crouched down beside Daniel, his expression one of deep concern. "Daniel, please listen to me," he urged gently. "Your body, you aren't strong enough." "I don't care." Daniel snapped back a flash of the fierce, unwavering spirit that had defined him as a firefighter igniting in his voice for the first time in months. "I have to see him. Now." A nurse, her own eyes glistening with emotion, gently squeezed his shoulder in a gesture of support and understanding. "Then let us help you get there," she said softly. The next few minutes were a blur of frantic, coordinated action. A gurney was quickly wheeled into the room. An ambulance was called and dispatched on an urgent priority. Within moments, Daniel was being carefully transferred and then rushed down the hospice hallway, his weak, compromised heart pounding wildly in his chest, not just from the physical exertion, but from something far stronger, a potent, all-consuming desperation to reach Max in time. Every bump in the road, every turn the ambulance took sent a jolt of painful agony radiating through his fragile bones. But he didn't complain. He didn't utter a single word of discomfort. The only thing that mattered, the only thought that consumed his fading consciousness, was making it to the clinic in time to see his best friend. Back at the veterinary clinic, the agonizing wait continued. Max's breathing, which had briefly seemed to stabilize after his powerful howl, was now slowing, once again becoming more shallow and erratic. Dr. Larson watched the monitors intently, his stomach tightening with a cold knot of dread. They had paused the euthanasia procedure, granting Max the precious gift of time. But how much longer could the old dog possibly hold on? His body was visibly failing his vital signs, continuing their slow, inexorable decline even as they waited. The old dog's chest rose and fell with slow, uneven, almost imperceptible breaths. His once bright eyes, which had briefly shown a flicker of hope, were beginning to dull over again, losing their focus. A cold, unwelcome realization spread through the room, shared silently among the staff. Daniel might not make it in time. One of the younger veterinary assistants, her voice barely a whisper, finally broke the tense silence. Should we go through with it now, Doctor? She asked tentatively, her eyes pleading for guidance. Dr. Larson hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Would it truly be the kinder option, the more humane path to let Max drift peacefully into eternal sleep, now before the pain and the struggle potentially worsened in these final moments? Or should they hold on, risking additional, perhaps unnecessary suffering for the slim chance of allowing a final precious goodbye between two inseparable souls? Then, as if sensing the immense gravity of the decision being considered, Max lifted his head one last time. It was a slow, difficult movement, but it was undeniably deliberate. His tired eyes, though still clouded, seemed to fix on something unseen. He wasn't finished waiting. He wasn't giving up the fight just yet, and neither, it seemed, was Daniel. The ambulance sirens wailed, cutting sharply through the night air as the vehicle sped through the city streets. Inside, Daniel's eyes remained wide open, fixed on some distant point, refusing to close. His frail fingers gripped the thin hospital blanket draped over him with surprising strength. His heart pounded erratically, each painful beat a harsh, undeniable reminder of how little time he had left, how precarious his own hold on life was. The paramedic seated beside him leaned in, his voice gentle but firm. "Almost there, sir. Just hold on a little longer. We're close." Daniel clenched his jaw, summoning every last reserve of his formidable willpower. He would hold on. He just prayed with all his might that Max could manage to do the same. Back at the clinic, the veterinary technician, meticulously watching Max's vital signs monitor, suddenly gasped, her eyes fixed on the screen. "His vitals?" she exclaimed, her voice filled with surprise and disbelief. Dr. Larson's head snapped toward her instantly, his expression one of urgent inquiry. "What about them? What do you see?" They're stabilizing," she reported, her voice trembling slightly. For the first time in what felt like endless hours, Max's erratic heartbeat was evening out, settling into a more steady rhythm. His breathing, while still weak and shallow, was no longer faltering or showing signs of imminent collapse. The old German shepherd, against all biological and medical logic, was waiting. He was holding on, summoning strength from a place nobody understood for his best friend, his human partner. And in that extraordinary moment, as Daniel's ambulance was mere minutes away from arriving at the clinic's door, something deep and profound within Max seemed to know it. It was a connection that transcended physical distance and defied the normal limits of life itself. An almost unbearable stillness descended upon the veterinary clinic. The only sounds now were the low, constant hum of the medical equipment and the soft, labored breathing of Max, the elderly canine German shepherd, who lay motionless yet remarkably alert on the examination table. His body seemed impossibly fragile, his graying fur barely rising and falling with each shallow breath. The monitors continued to flicker, faithfully tracking a heartbeat that by all rights should have ceased long ago. Dr. Larson glanced at his watch, the seconds ticking by with agonizing slowness. The ambulance carrying Daniel was only minutes away now, perhaps 5 or 10 at most. But he couldn't be sure if Max's failing body had even that much time left within it. His physical systems were in the process of shutting down, yet he was clinging to life with a tenacity that defied both reason and nature. It was as if his very soul steadfastly refused to leave this world until he had seen Daniel one last time. Max had dedicated his entire life to selflessly saving others. Now, in his final moments, he was fighting purely for himself, for this one last connection. The vet's assistant, Emily, her voice barely a whisper, broke the profound silence. "He's really waiting for him, isn't he?" she murmured, her eyes fixed on the old dog, wet with emotion. Dr. Larson nodded slowly, his throat tightening with his own welling emotions. "Yeah," he confirmed softly. He is. The ambulance sirens, now silent, screeched to a halt directly in front of the clinic's entrance. The paramedics inside wasted no time rushing to open the rear doors and prepare for unloading. Inside the ambulance, Daniel's frail body trembled uncontrollably with exhaustion from the arduous journey, but his hands remained tightly clenched around the metal rails of the gurney he lay upon. He was still conscious, his eyes, though sunken and heavily rimmed with the dark shadows of pain and fatigue, were wide burning with a fierce, unwavering determination. The moment the ambulance door swung open, revealing the clinic entrance, he gasped out, his voice raspy. "Where's Max?" A paramedic moved quickly and efficiently. "Let's get him inside now," he instructed, and together they began to maneuver the gurney out of the ambulance. The nurses and staff waiting at the entrance barely had time to fully adjust the gurney before Daniel, with a surge of desperate urgency, tried to push himself into a more upright position. His severely weakened body was clearly not cooperating. He was profoundly frail, fragile, and exhausted. But sheer unadulterated willpower and the desperate need to see Max propelled him forward. The second they rolled him through the clinic's front doors, the atmosphere in the waiting area shifted dramatically. Everyone seated there turned their heads, their faces registering shock and confusion at the sight of the gurney and the clearly critical patient. The receptionist covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes wide with disbelief. Emily, who had stepped into the waiting area from the exam room, stumbled back slightly, her eyes already wet with tears as she witnessed the incredible scene. Dr. Larson himself burst through the doors of the exam room, rushing forward as the paramedics swiftly wheeled Daniel and the gurney closer. "He's still here," the vet stated, his voice thick with a sudden, overwhelming wave of emotion. "Max, he's waiting for you, Daniel." Hearing these words, Daniel choked back a sob, the sound ragged and painful. Inside the examination room, Max still lay relatively still on the table. But the instant Daniel's familiar scent, a scent imprinted on years of memory and shared experiences, filled the air, the old dog's body visibly shuddered. A deep, ragged inhale drew the scent fully into his lungs. One of his paws twitched. A faint flicker of recognition sparked in his half-closed eyes. Then, with immense effort, a slow, clearly painful attempt, he tried to lift his head from the table, straining toward the source of that beloved scent. Dr. Larson rushed to his side, his voice urgent and reassuring. "Max, easy boy. Take it easy. He's here. Daniel is here." The old dog tried again, his weak muscles straining visibly, his graying ears twitching weakly, desperately, trying to locate the sound of Daniel's voice, his presence. He knew. Somehow, miraculously, he knew Daniel was finally here within reach. A nurse quickly but gently adjusted the gurney, positioning it so that Daniel could be rolled as close as possible to the examination table where Max lay. Daniel's breathing was rapid and erratic, every single movement a monumental struggle against his failing body. But he didn't stop. He reached out a trembling hand, his frail fingers tentatively brushing against Max's soft graying fur. "Hey, buddy," Daniel rasped out, his voice barely above a fragile whisper, thick with emotion. Max's entire body reacted to the sound of that voice, the familiar touch. His tail, which had not shown any sign of movement for hours, gave a slow, weak twitch against the cold metal table. His chest rose slightly higher than before, his shallow breathing shifting, deepening almost imperceptibly. The dying K9, the hero dog, recognized the voice, the touch, the scent of his human, his partner. Daniel sucked in a sharp, shaky breath, his vision blurring with a sudden rush of tears. His best friend, as Max, was still here. He had made it. "You waited for me," Daniel whispered, his trembling hand pressing gently against Max's warm side. In response, Max let out a weak, broken whimper, a sound filled with immense relief and recognition. The room fell utterly silent once more, but the emotional energy within that small space was almost deafening, a tangible force. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move or interrupt the profound, sacred moment unfolding between a man and his dog. Ducart. Larson felt something deep in his chest tighten, a painful ache. He had witnessed countless poignant goodbyes between owners and their beloved pets throughout his career, moments filled with sorrow and love. But he had never ever witnessed anything like this. This wasn't just an old dog saying goodbye to his owner. This was a seasoned warrior, a loyal partner, holding on with every fiber of his being, waiting patiently for his human counterpart to arrive before finally allowing himself to rest. Daniel's breathing hitched a ragged, painful sound. He squeezed his eyes shut for a brief moment, his fragile body trembling violently with the sheer, overwhelming exhaustion that had brought him here. He had used every last ounce of strength, every atom of willpower he possessed to make this impossible journey. But it had been undeniably worth it. He wasn't going to let Max face the end alone. That was a promise he had made years ago, a promise forged in the shared danger and reinforced by a decade of unwavering loyalty. "You did good, buddy," Daniel whispered, his voice rough and cracked with emotion, his eyes still closed. "You did so good." Max's body seemed to relax slightly beneath Daniel's comforting touch, some of the deep-seated tension that had held him together for so long, visibly fading away. The intense fight he had been clinging to so fiercely, the desperate determination that had kept him tethered to life in this room was beginning to ease its grip. But he still wasn't quite ready to let go entirely. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat raw and aching. He gently stroked the soft, graying fur around Max's ears, a gesture they had shared countless times over the years. He had been dreading this exact moment for weeks, knowing it was inevitably coming, yet simultaneously refusing to fully confront the painful reality. But now somehow, in the quiet intensity of their shared presence, it didn't feel solely like a devastating ending. It felt like something far deeper, something more meaningful. A sacred promise finally kept a bond tested by time, distance, illness, and the very brink of death, yet ultimately remaining unbroken. Daniel inhaled sharply, drawing in a ragged breath, blinking rapidly to clear away the tears that threatened to spill from his tired eyes but which he refused to let fall. His lips trembled slightly as he leaned in even closer, his forehead gently lowering until it almost touched Max's head. "You don't have to fight anymore, buddy," he murmured, his voice barely audible, thick with love and sorrow. "I'm here now. I'm right here with you. You can rest now. It's okay to let go." Max let out a deep, shuddering exhale, a sound that seemed to release years of tension and pain. His body, which had been held so rigidly, so tightly with resistance, finally completely relaxed. His heartbeat slowed perceptibly on the monitor. His breathing softened, becoming shallower and slower with each passing second. But even as his physical body weakened, his clouded eyes, though dimming, remained steadfastly locked on Daniel's face. He wasn't afraid. He had waited, he had held on, and now finally reunited with the one person who mattered most, he was ready. Ready to let go, knowing he was not alone. The room stood utterly still, time seemingly suspended in deference to the moment. Max's shallow, fading breaths were the only sounds that filled the quiet space, each one more distant, more fragile than the last. His frail body, the same body that had once possessed the immense strength and courage required to pull injured survivors from the chaotic wreckage of collapsed buildings and brave the terrifying heat and smoke of raging fires, now rested gently against Daniel's trembling hand. He had held on just long enough to see his partner, his human, one final precious time. Daniel's fingers, weakened by illness, barely had the strength left to grip Max's fur, yet he absolutely refused to let go. His own heart pounded wildly and erratically against his fragile chest, a painful, persistent reminder that time was rapidly slipping away for both of them. Dr. Larson stood slightly back, watching the scene unfold, his usual professional demeanor visibly faltering, overwhelmed by the raw emotion in the room. He had been present for countless goodbyes between owners and their beloved pets, moments always filled with sadness and grief. But this was fundamentally different. This wasn't simply an old dog saying goodbye to his human companion. This was the culmination of a unique, profound bond forged through the intense crucible of shared danger, through years of unwavering sacrifice, deep devotion, and mutual trust. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat raw and aching with suppressed emotion. "You're a good boy, Max," he managed to say, his voice cracking painfully. "The best boy anyone could ever ask for." Max let out another faint broken whimper, a soft sound of acknowledgement, his dimming eyes still locked onto Daniel's face, even as the immense weight of exhaustion and impending death hung heavily over him. Daniel sucked in a ragged breath, tears finally blurring his vision. "I didn't want you to go alone, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with sorrow, his fingers tightening, albeit weakly, against Max's fur. "I promised you, remember?" Max blinked slowly in response, as if confirming that he did indeed remember that unspoken promise, that unwavering commitment. The old dog's body trembled slightly. His strength was visibly failing, now ebbing away with each shallow breath. And yet, even as his physical form gave out, he still refused to fully close his eyes. He was waiting, it seemed, waiting for Daniel to be ready to let him go. The medical machines in the room continued their soft, rhythmic beeping, tracking Max's weakening heartbeat, a poignant counterpoint to the profound silence. The veterinary staff stood frozen near the doorway, unable to look away from the powerful scene unfolding before them. Emily, the vet assistant, openly wiped a tear from her cheek, her heart aching. She had grown accustomed to the inherent sadness that often came with this job, witnessing the end of cherished lives. But this was different. Max should have been gone already. Moments ago, he had been at the absolute brink, barely breathing, mere seconds away from drifting into unconsciousness and peace. But the second Daniel had arrived, the moment his human had touched him, he had somehow found the impossible strength, the sheer will to hold on. No one spoke a word. No one dared to interrupt the sanctity of this final shared moment. This time, this profound, heartbreaking connection belonged entirely to them, to Daniel and Max. Daniel took another shaking breath, feeling the undeniable weakness spreading through his own body. He was weak, far too weak. Even now, in this moment of reunion, he could feel himself slipping, the relentless grip of the cancer tightening its hold. The disease had stolen everything from him over the past months, his physical strength, his hard-won independence, his future. But it could not steal this moment. He had fought with everything he had just to be here, and Max, in his own quiet way, had fought just as hard to stay. But the fight for both of them was inexorably coming to an end. Daniel exhaled slowly, deliberately pressing his forehead gently, tenderly against Max's head. The familiar warmth of the old shepherd's fur against his skin sent a wave of memories crashing through him. Vivid, poignant echoes of their shared life, the long, exhausting nights spent together at chaotic disaster sites, the quiet, companionable, long drives in the truck, the countless long walks where they didn't need words to understand each other's thoughts and feelings. They had always faced everything together, every challenge, every danger, every triumph. And now, in this final quiet moment, they were facing this together too. "You don't have to fight anymore, buddy," Daniel whispered again, his voice barely audible, a mere breath of sound. "I'll be okay now. I'm here. You can rest now. It's time." Max let out a deep, shaky sigh, the sound ragged and final. His body, which had been tense with the effort of clinging to life, finally utterly relaxed. His heartbeat slowed dramatically on the monitor, his breathing softened and grew almost imperceptible. Then, as if the immense weight of years of service, loyalty, and holding on had finally been lifted from his weary shoulders, he let out one last gentle breath, and he was gone. The silence that followed Max's passing was not just the absence of sound. It was a heavy, deafening void, thick with sorrow and disbelief. Emily, the vet assistant, covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes wide and streaming with tears. The receptionist in the doorway turned away, her shoulders visibly trembling with suppressed sobs. Dr. Larson closed his eyes for a long moment, exhaling slowly through his nose, his own grief a quiet internal ache. He had witnessed death countless times throughout his career, the passing of beloved animal companions. It never stopped hurting. But this was different. This wasn't simply another loss, another sad farewell. This was the end of something far greater, something almost sacred, a partnership, a profound brotherhood, a love and bond that ran deeper than words could ever express. Daniel did not immediately break down into loud sobs. He did not collapse in grief. He simply remained exactly where he was, his forehead still resting gently against Max's cooling fur, his fingers still loosely tangled in the old dog's coat. His shoulders shook visibly with every ragged breath. He took his entire body trembling with exhaustion and emotion, but he did not let go. "I'm proud of you, buddy," he whispered, his voice barely audible, thick with love and finality. Max had waited for him, he had held on against impossible odds, and now he had passed away in peace, knowing he was not alone, knowing his human was right there beside him. And for Daniel in that moment, that was undeniably enough. Dr. Larson took a careful, hesitant step forward, his hand gently reaching out towards Daniel's shoulder. "Daniel?" he murmured softly, his voice filled with concern. The old firefighter did not move. His breath remained uneven, his body visibly weak and fragile. But he stayed resolutely beside Max, his head resting against the still form of his partner. Then with heartbreaking slowness, his hands slipped from the German Shepherd's fur. His fingers, which had once possessed the strength to pull hoses, wield axes, and rescue victims from danger, went limp. His chest shuddered once then, twice, a final ragged attempt to draw air. And then it stilled. Dr. Larson's breath caught sharply in his own throat. "No!" He breathed out the word, a gasp of disbelief. Emily gasped audibly, her eyes fixed on Daniel's still form. In the quiet of the room, the machine monitoring Daniel's fragile heart let out a sharp, prolonged, and utterly final beep, a flat, unbroken line on the screen. In the profound stillness of that small, dimly lit veterinary clinic room, Daniel had followed his best friend. The piercing, prolonged beep of the heart monitor stretched out into a flat, unbroken line on the screen, confirming the undeniable. The room stood utterly frozen, time suspended once more, the immense crushing weight of the moment sinking in like a tidal wave. Dr. Larson rushed forward instinctively, his training taking over, pressing 2 fingers to Daniel's neck, searching for a pulse that he knew deep down wouldn't be there. His body was still motionless, his face remarkably calm, serene, even as if he had simply drifted off into a deep, peaceful sleep alongside his partner. But everyone in that room knew with an absolute certainty that transcended rational understanding that this was no ordinary passing. Daniel had fought with every last atom of strength he possessed, defied every medical expectation, just to make the arduous journey to this room. And now, with his loyal best friend finally gone, it was as if his own body had at last given him permission to let go too. His final battle was over, not just against cancer, but against the very notion of being left behind. The profound, extraordinary bond between this man and his dog had proven so powerful, so utterly unbreakable, that it had defied even the absolute boundary of death itself. Emily clutched her clipboard tightly to her chest, her breath shallow, her eyes wide, and still filled with disbelief and tears. He just, she stammered, unable to find the words to articulate the unbelievable event they had just witnessed. The receptionist stepped fully into the doorway, her hands shaking visibly, her face pale. Dr. Larson's own heart hammered loudly in his chest, a stark contrast to the stillness before him. He had faced death many times in his profession. He had watched owners grieve, had witnessed the raw, painful heartbreak of saying goodbye to cherished animal companions. But this was something fundamentally different, something unprecedented. Daniel hadn't simply died. In the most literal and profound sense, he had followed Max. The paramedics who had brought Daniel to the clinic, still catching their breath in the hallway, from the rush of getting him inside, heard the sudden, prolonged beeping from the room. Their training kicked in instantly. "Move!" one of them shouted, pushing past the stunned veterinary staff, immediately moving towards Daniel to check his vitals and assess his condition. "He's unresponsive, starting compressions." But Dr. Larson, his voice heavy with emotion and a strange sense of awe, stopped him. The veterinarian shook his head slowly, his face unreadable, a mix of sorrow, understanding, and profound respect. "Don't he stated simply, his voice quiet but firm. The paramedic froze, his brow furrowed in confusion and protest. "What do you mean, don't?" he questioned, ready to argue. Dr. Larson's voice was thick, heavy with the weight of the moment. "Look at him," he instructed softly. The paramedics looked. They saw Daniel's frail hands still resting gently against Max's lifeless body. They saw the serene, peaceful expression on his face. They registered that his breathing had not been ragged or panicked in the moments before it ceased. He hadn't suffered in the end. He had simply quietly let go. One of the nurses who had followed the paramedics into the room, covering her mouth with both hands, whispered, "Oh my God." The words a soft expression of stunned realization. A heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the room, once more different this time. A silence of understanding, of profound shared awe. And then, one by one, the entire staff, the paramedics, the nurses, the vet, and his assistants, they understood. Max had been holding on, waiting with every ounce of his strength for Daniel. Daniel had been fighting against the impossible odds of his own terminal illness, holding on for Max. And the moment they were finally miraculously together again, they both seemed to know on a level that defied all rational explanation that it was finally time. Time to let go. The clinic's clock on the wall ticked away the seconds with relentless indifference, the immense weight of the extraordinary reality settling on everyone's shoulders. Dr. Larson was the one who finally broke the silence again. He took a deep, steadying breath, trying to compose himself to regain a semblance of his professional composure. Then he walked slowly over to Daniel's gurney. Carefully, with immense gentleness and respect, he reached down and lifted Daniel's hand, which had fallen away, and placed it deliberately back over Max's still lifeless body. A symbolic gesture of honor, a final poignant affirmation of their bond. They belong together, he murmured, his voice quiet but resonant with conviction. In that moment, facing the undeniable truth of what they had just witnessed, no one in the room disagreed. Outside the clinic, the storm that had been threatening the horizon all evening, a heavy, pregnant sky mirroring the tension and sorrow within, finally broke with full force. Rain began to fall, first softly, then with a steady, rhythmic patter against the clinic windows, a sound like gentle weeping, as if the very heavens were mourning the passing of these two inseparable souls. But inside that small, quiet room, amidst the stillness and the profound sense of loss, it did not feel like a definitive ending. It felt like something far greater, something transcendent. The enduring power of a bond that had never truly broken a final goodbye, that was never in the deepest sense a real farewell. Because in the end, they left this world the very same way they had lived their lives together. The extraordinary news of Max and Daniel's final reunion spread like wildfire, faster than anyone could have possibly anticipated. It began naturally with the clinic staff, too shaken, too deeply moved by what they had witnessed to keep the story to themselves. A man and his dog, both teetering on the edge of death, had somehow found the strength and the will to wait for each other, and had ultimately left this world side by side together. A veteran firefighter and his loyal canine partner, inseparable throughout a decade of life-saving service, were now bound together in eternity. The story made its way from the veterinary office to the hospice staff who had cared for Daniel, then quickly spread through the close-knit community of Daniel's old fire station. Within hours, it had reached local news outlets, exploded across social media feeds, and captured the hearts of millions of people around the world. People who had never met Daniel, who had never even heard of Max, felt the profound weight and power of their story deep in their bones. Loyalty like that, it wasn't merely rare, it was a once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon, a powerful reminder of the extraordinary connections possible between humans and animals. A week later, the firehouse where Daniel had served with unwavering dedication for the majority of his distinguished career held a memorial service to honor both him and Max. The turnout was nothing short of overwhelming, hundreds upon hundreds of people from all walks of life. Active firefighters and retirees, paramedics, K-9 handlers from across the region, veterans, community members whose lives Daniel and Max had potentially touched. stood together in the soft rain to pay their respects and honor the memory of a remarkable man and his equally remarkable dog. The station's flag flew solemnly at half-mast, a symbol of mourning. At the very front of the gathering, two framed photographs stood side by side on a simple easel, one a vibrant portrait of Daniel Strong and smiling proudly wearing his heavy turnout gear, and the other a striking photo of Max, his ears perked attentively, his official K9 badge gleaming proudly on his collar. The city's mayor stepped forward to deliver a eulogy, his voice thick with emotion and breaking visibly as he read the words inscribed on a newly created bronze plaque dedicated to both of them. A hero never walks alone, and some bonds, even in death, will never break. At the back of the solemn crowd, standing quietly beneath a large black umbrella, Dr. Larson watched the ceremony unfold in silence. He hadn't been able to shake the powerful, haunting image of that night in the clinic from his mind. Max holding on, waiting with fierce determination for Daniel. Daniel fighting against impossible odds to reach Max. And then the profound, simultaneous peace that settled over them both as they let go together. He had witnessed death countless times in many forms, but he had never ever seen anything like that. It hadn't felt like a tragedy, not entirely. It had felt like something far deeper, something almost sacred, something he couldn't fully explain, a mystery of connection that still sent shivers down his spine whenever he thought about it. Emily, the vet assistant, stood beside him quietly, wiping tears from her eyes with a tissue. "I keep thinking about it," she whispered softly, her voice still trembling. "About how Daniel just let go right after Max." Dr. Larson nodded slowly, understanding completely. "Yeah," he murmured back, his gaze fixed on the photos of the two partners. "Because I don't think he was afraid anymore. Not with Max right there." As the memorial ceremony concluded, the crowd slowly began to disperse, people quietly offering condolences and sharing memories. But one figure remained behind near the front. A firefighter younger than many of the veterans present walked slowly up to the newly installed plaque, his heavy boots making soft sounds against the wet pavement. Then he knelt down respectfully. A young German shepherd, unmistakably similar in appearance to Max, though still full of youthful energy, sat patiently beside him. The young dog's ears twitched, his head cocked slightly as he gazed up at the framed photo of the old K9 hero. And then quietly, almost imperceptibly, he let out a single soft, mournful whine, a sound of instinctive recognition and respect for the legend. The firefighter reached down his hand, finding the soft fur of the young shepherd's head, stroking it gently. "He had a good life," the firefighter whispered to his new partner, his voice low. "And now it's time for us to do the same. We carry on his legacy." The young dog lowered his head slightly, as if in quiet understanding, and together, the new partnership echoing, the old walked away toward whatever future awaited them, carrying the torch of loyalty forward. The world, as it always does, eventually moved on. But the extraordinary, deeply moving story of Max and Daniel never truly faded from memory. Their names became more than just individual recollections. They transformed into a powerful symbol of loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a human and a dog. Firefighters gathered around the station housey kitchen table would whisper their story to new recruits, instilling in them the values of partnership and devotion. K9 handlers told it to their own canine partners, a silent promise exchanged between two souls, bound together by service and love, a reminder of the depth of their connection. At the entrance to the firehouse, a beautiful bronze statue was later erected, depicting a firefighter kneeling on one knee, his hand gently resting on the head of a loyal German shepherd, sitting faithfully by his side forever together, guarding the station they both served. People still visited the memorial site, running their hands gently over the words engraved on the plaque bearing Max and Daniel's names. Some left fresh flowers placed respectfully at the base of the statue. Some left old, worn dog tags, silent tokens of appreciation. And some simply stood in quiet reverence, feeling the immense weight and profound meaning of what true, unwavering loyalty truly signifies. And in homes across the country, prompted by the powerful narrative of Max and Daniel, People hug their own dogs just a little bit tighter, a silent acknowledgement that some bonds like theirs are so strong, so deep, so truly extraordinary that even after death, they never ever break. If this incredibly moving story about the unbreakable bond between Max and Daniel touched your heart as deeply as it touched ours, please remember to subscribe to our channel, give this video a heartfelt like to help share their legacy, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any future powerful and inspiring stories we bring to you. Don't forget to share this video with someone you know who understands and believes in the profound power of loyalty, courage, and the extraordinary capacity for love, because stories as impactful as this one truly deserve to be remembered and shared forever. And for the majority of his distinguished career, held a memorial service to honor both him and Max. The turnout was nothing short of overwhelming, hundreds upon hundreds of people from all walks of life. Active firefighters and retirees, paramedics, K-9 handlers from across the region, veterans community members whose lives Daniel and Max had potentially touched, stood together in the soft rain to pay their respects and honor the memory of a remarkable man and his equally remarkable dog. The station's flag flew solemnly at half-mast, a symbol of mourning. At the very front of the gathering, two framed photographs stood side by side on a simple easel, one a vibrant portrait of Daniel Strong and smiling proudly wearing his heavy turnout gear, and the other a striking photo of Max, his ears perked attentively, his official K-9 badge gleaming proudly on his collar. The city's mayor stepped forward to deliver a eulogy, his voice thick with emotion and breaking visibly as he read the words inscribed on a newly created bronze plaque dedicated to both of them. A hero never walks alone, and some bonds, even in death, will never break. At the back of the solemn crowd, standing quietly beneath a large black umbrella, Dr. Larson watched the ceremony unfold in silence. He hadn't been able to shake the powerful, haunting image of that night in the clinic from his mind. Max holding on, waiting with fierce determination for Daniel. Daniel fighting against impossible odds to reach Max. And then the profound simultaneous peace that settled over them both as they let go together. He had witnessed death countless times in many forms, but he had never ever seen anything like that. It hadn't felt like a tragedy, not entirely. It had felt like something far deeper, something almost sacred, something he couldn't fully explain, a mystery of connection that still sent shivers down his spine whenever he thought about it. Emily, the vet assistant, stood beside him quietly, wiping tears from her eyes with a tissue. "I keep thinking about it," she whispered softly, her voice still trembling, "about how Daniel just let go right after Max." Dr. Larson nodded slowly, understanding completely. "Yeah," he murmured back, his gaze fixed on the photos of the two partners. "Because I don't think he was afraid anymore. Not with Max right there." As the memorial ceremony concluded, the crowd slowly began to disperse, people quietly offering condolences and sharing memories. But one figure remained behind near the front. A firefighter younger than many of the veterans present walked slowly up to the newly installed plaque, his heavy boots making soft sounds against the wet pavement. Then he knelt down respectfully. A young German shepherd, unmistakably similar in appearance to Max, though still full of youthful energy, sat patiently beside him. The young dog's ears twitched, his head cocked slightly as he gazed up at the framed photo of the old K-9 hero. And then quietly, almost imperceptibly, he let out a single soft, mournful whine, a sound of instinctive recognition and respect for the legend. The firefighter reached down his hand, finding the soft fur of the young shepherd's head, stroking it gently. "He had a good life," the firefighter whispered to his new partner, his voice low. "And now it's time for us to do the same. We carry on his legacy." The young dog lowered his head slightly, as if in quiet understanding, and together, the new partnership echoing, the old walked away toward whatever future awaited them, carrying the torch of loyalty forward. The world, as it always does, eventually moved on. But the extraordinary, deeply moving story of Max and Daniel never truly faded from memory. Their names became more than just individual recollections. They transformed into a powerful symbol of loyalty, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a human and a dog. Firefighters gathered around the station house kitchen table would whisper their story to new recruits, instilling in them the values of partnership and devotion. Canine handlers told it to their own canine partners, a silent promise exchanged between two souls, bound together by service and love, a reminder of the depth of their connection. At the entrance to the firehouse, a beautiful bronze statue was later erected, depicting a firefighter kneeling on one knee, his hand gently resting on the head of a loyal German shepherd, sitting faithfully by his side forever together, guarding the station they both served. People still visited the memorial site, running their hands gently over the words engraved on the plaque bearing Max and Daniel's names. Some left fresh flowers placed respectfully at the base of the statue. Some left old, worn dog tags, silent tokens of appreciation. And some simply stood in quiet reverence, feeling the immense weight and profound meaning of what true, unwavering loyalty truly signifies. And in homes across the country, prompted by the powerful narrative of Max and Daniel, people hugged their own dogs just a little bit tighter, a silent acknowledgement that some bonds like theirs are so strong, so deep, so truly extraordinary, that even after death, they never ever break. If this incredibly moving story about the unbreakable bond between Max and Daniel touched your heart as deeply as it touched ours, please remember to subscribe to our channel, give this video a heartfelt like to help share their legacy, and turn on notifications so you won't miss any future powerful and inspiring stories we bring to you. Don't forget to share this video with someone you know who understands and believes in the profound power